What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down with one of television's most controversial hosts? In just 30 seconds, a simple question ignites a firestorm that ends with a legendary actor walking off set, leaving cameras rolling and a studio audience in complete shock. The evening started like any other episode. Bill Maher's late-night talk show was known for its edgy political commentary and bold conversations. Tonight's guest was supposed to be a ratings goldmine. Denzel Washington, the two-time Academy Award winner, was there to promote his latest film. The audience buzzed with excitement as the show's familiar theme music played. The house band finished their opening number, and the announcer's voice boomed through the studio, introducing the host with practiced enthusiasm. The studio lights were bright and hot, creating that familiar television glow. Audience members fanned themselves with their programs, their faces eager with anticipation. This was the show everyone talked about the next day at work. The show that generated headlines and social media buzz. Tonight promised to be no different. Bill emerged from backstage to thunderous applause, waving to the crowd with his trademark casual confidence. He wore jeans and a blazer, his uniform for looking simultaneously relaxed and authoritative. He settled behind his desk, shuffled some papers for the cameras, and launched into his opening monologue about the week's political headlines. The jokes landed well. The audience laughed and clapped at the right moments. Bill was in his element, riding the energy of the crowd, building momentum for what everyone was really waiting for. The interview, the conversation, the moment when he would sit down with one of cinema's greatest actors and, hopefully, create some memorable television. Denzel walked onto the stage with his characteristic grace and confidence. The crowd erupted in applause. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his presence commanding yet approachable. His smile was genuine, warm. He waved to different sections of the audience, making eye contact, connecting with people. This was what he did. This was what he had done for decades. Make people feel seen, feel valued. Bill stood from behind his desk, extending his hand with that knowing smirk he was famous for. The smirk that said he was in on the joke, that he saw through the Hollywood phoniness, that he was the one person willing to ask the tough questions. They shook hands firmly. The cameras captured every moment as both men settled into their seats. Denzel adjusted his jacket, crossed one leg over the other, and settled in with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "So great to have you here, Denzel," Bill began, his tone friendly enough. "I've been a fan for years. Training Day, Malcolm X, Glory. You've created some truly iconic performances." "Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. I've been fortunate to work with incredible directors and talented casts throughout my career," Denzel replied graciously. "Let's talk about your new film," Bill continued, picking up a small card with notes. "It's a thriller, right? Something about corporate corruption?" Denzel nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, it's a story about a whistleblower who discovers his company has been covering up environmental violations. It's really about the cost of doing the right thing, even when the system is designed to punish you for it." "Sounds timely," Bill said. "We see these corporate scandals all the time. Companies poisoning water supplies, covering up data, lying to regulators. And usually, they get away with it because the people who could speak up are too afraid." "Exactly. That's what drew me to the script. My character is an ordinary person who finds himself in an extraordinary situation. He has to choose between his career, his safety, his family's security, and what he knows is right. It's a universal dilemma." The first few minutes continued smoothly. Bill asked about the film's director, about the casting process, about filming locations. Denzel answered thoughtfully, discussing his character's journey and what drew him to the role. He shared an amusing anecdote about a challenging scene that had required multiple takes. The audience laughed at appropriate moments. Everything seemed normal, professional, cordial even. But anyone who knew Bill's style, anyone who had watched his show regularly, knew this was just the warm-up. The soft questions before the hard ones. The pleasant small talk before the real conversation began. Bill had a pattern. Lure his guests into comfort, then pivot to something controversial. It was his signature move, the thing that made his show different from all the others. Bill glanced down at his notes, then back up at Denzel. He shifted in his chair, leaning back slightly. That telltale glint appeared in his eye, the one his regular viewers recognized immediately. The shift was about to happen. "You know, Denzel, I find it interesting that you chose this particular story. A film about corporate corruption, about powerful people doing bad things and getting away with it." Yes, it's a story that resonates, Denzel replied, not yet sensing the shift in tone. Then Bill leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, his fingers steepled. So Denzel, your new film deals with themes of justice and morality, with people in positions of power abusing that power. But I have to ask, and I hope you don't mind me getting real here, how do you reconcile playing these righteous characters, these champions of truth and justice, when Hollywood itself is so morally bankrupt? When the industry you're part of has its own massive problems with corruption and exploitation? Denzel paused. His expression remained calm, but something flickered across his face. A brief moment of recognition that the tone had shifted. Well, Bill, I think that's a broad generalization. Yes, Hollywood has problems. Every industry does. But I think artists, storytellers, they try to tell stories that resonate with people. Stories about the human condition, about moral choices, about what it means to do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's what I've always tried to do in my career. Bill nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't really listening. He was waiting for his moment to jump back in. Sure. But don't you think there's something fundamentally hypocritical about it? I mean, here's what I see. You actors, you stand up there at award shows in your designer gowns and your rented tuxedos, and you give these impassioned speeches about social justice, about equality, about helping the less fortunate. You cry about climate change and economic inequality, but then you go home to your mansions in gated communities. You fly on private jets. You live in a bubble, completely insulated from the problems you claim to care about. How can you possibly relate to real people? Bill wasn't satisfied. His voice was rising now, taking on that edge of righteous indignation he was known for. But don't you think it's hypocritical? I mean, you actors stand up there at award shows, preaching to the rest of us about how to live our lives, about politics and social issues. You tell us to reduce our carbon footprint while you're flying around in private jets. You talk about economic inequality while you're making $20 million per movie? You live in a bubble, a gilded, privileged bubble. How can you possibly relate to real people? To the single mother working 2 jobs? To the guy who just lost his factory position? You can't. You're completely disconnected. The audience grew quiet. The shift in energy was palpable. What had started as a normal interview had suddenly become something else, something tense. You could feel it spreading through the studio like a chill. Denzel sat up straighter, his jaw tightening just slightly. His hands, which had been gesturing naturally as he spoke, now rested more deliberately on the armrests. I don't think that's fair, Bill, Denzel said, his voice still controlled but with a new firmness to it. Many actors, many people in this industry use their platform to shine a light on important issues that matter. That doesn't make them hypocrites. That makes them human beings who care about the world beyond their own immediate circumstances. Should successful people not speak up about injustice? Should we only listen to people who are currently struggling? That doesn't make sense. But that's exactly my point, Bill continued, his hand slicing through the air for emphasis, his voice dripping with that practiced indignation that his viewers loved and his critics despised. You care about the world, but only from 30,000 feet up. You've never had to struggle. Not really, not in any meaningful way. You've never had to choose between paying rent or buying groceries. You've never had to decide which bill to pay this month and which one to let slide. So how can you possibly understand what regular Americans are going through? You can't. You literally cannot comprehend their reality. But that's exactly my point, Bill continued, his voice rising with that practiced indignation. You care about the world, but only from 30,000 feet up. You've never had to struggle. You've never had to choose between paying rent or buying groceries. So how can you possibly understand what regular Americans are going through? Denzel's eyes narrowed. When he spoke next, his voice was measured, but there was steel beneath it. Bill, I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. My mother was a beautician. She owned a salon, but there were lean times. Times when money was tight. My father was a Pentecostal minister. He also worked at the water department. They both worked incredibly hard to provide for our family, to make sure my siblings and I had opportunities. I know exactly what struggle looks like. I've seen it up close. I've lived it. Just because someone becomes successful later in life doesn't mean they forget where they came from. It doesn't mean they stop caring about people who are still fighting those battles every single day. Oh, come on, Bill scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away Denzel's words like annoying insects. That was what, 40 years ago? 50 years ago? You can't possibly tell me you remember what it's like to be broke, to struggle, to worry about money. You probably spend more on a single dinner at some fancy restaurant than most people make in a week. Your shoes probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. That's not struggle. That's not reality. That's a distant memory you dust off when it's convenient for your image. The audience was completely silent now. A few people looked at each other with wide eyes, uncertain expressions on their faces. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that this had gone beyond normal interview banter. This wasn't provocative anymore. This was becoming personal. This was becoming an attack. The crew members standing off camera exchanged glances, wondering if someone should intervene. Denzel remained composed on the outside, but his body language had shifted. His shoulders were tense now. His voice, when he spoke, carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "You're making assumptions about me, Bill. Assumptions about my character, my values, my life, my memories, my connections to where I came from. You're painting me with this broad brush, putting me in this box labeled out-of-touch celebrity, but you don't know me. You don't know what I do with my time. You don't know what causes I support. You don't know the conversations I have or the work I do when cameras aren't rolling. I know your type." Bill shot back, leaning forward aggressively now, his posture almost confrontational. His voice had taken on a sharper edge, the friendly host persona completely abandoned. "I've interviewed hundreds of celebrities over the years, hundreds, and you know what? You all say the same things. You mouth the same platitudes about caring and giving back. You're all so concerned about appearing virtuous, about protecting your carefully crafted public image. But it's all performative. It's all calculated. It's all about protecting your brand, your marketability. You've got teams of publicists and managers telling you exactly what to say to seem relatable and down to earth." Denzel took a slow, deliberate breath. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the armrests of the chair, now gripped them slightly, not violently, not dramatically, but enough to show that he was actively controlling his response. "Bill, I came here tonight in good faith. I came here to talk about a film that our entire team, hundreds of people, worked incredibly hard on for months. Cast, crew, directors, writers, not to be insulted. Not to be psychoanalyzed by someone who doesn't know me. Not to have my integrity questioned by someone who doesn't know anything about my life outside of what he sees in magazines or reads in tabloids or assumes based on stereotypes." Insulted? Bill laughed, but it was a harsh sound. Not genuine amusement, but something crueler. Dismissive. "This is a conversation, Denzel. This is what we do here on this show. We have real talk. We get beyond the promotional puffery and the carefully rehearsed talking points. We actually dig into things. If you can't handle honest questions, if you can't handle someone pushing back on your narrative, maybe you should stick to those softball interviews on morning shows where everyone kisses your feet and throws you underhand questions about your workout routine." "Honest questions?" Denzel repeated, his voice steady but growing firmer with each word. "You haven't asked me a single honest question since you started down this path. You haven't asked me about my work. You haven't asked me about my experiences. You haven't asked me anything that would require you to actually listen to the answer. You've made accusations. You've put words in my mouth. You've created this entire narrative about who I am and what I believe without giving me any real opportunity to respond. You've assumed the worst about me from the moment you decided to shift this conversation." Bill rolled his eyes dramatically, turning slightly toward the audience as if to say, "Can you believe this guy?" "Oh, here we go. Here we go. The victim card. Classic celebrity move. Absolutely classic. Can't handle a little criticism, so you claim you're being attacked. You claim you're being treated unfairly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You live in such a bubble of affirmation that the moment someone questions you, the moment someone doesn't immediately validate everything you say, you fall apart. I'm not playing victim," Denzel said, his voice rising for the first time, not shouting, but projecting, making sure he was heard, making sure his point landed. "I'm calling out disrespect. There's a fundamental difference between asking tough questions and being deliberately antagonistic. There's a difference between challenging someone's ideas and attacking their character. You're not interested in a conversation. You're not interested in learning anything. You're not interested in hearing my perspective. You're interested in creating a moment for your show. You're interested in being provocative for the sake of being provocative. That's not journalism. That's not even good entertainment." "My show?" Bill spread his arms wide, gesturing to the studio, to the cameras, to the audience sitting in stunned silence. This show is about truth. It's about calling out hypocrisy wherever we find it. Whether that's in politics, in religion, in Hollywood, wherever. And right now, I'm looking at someone who pretends to be a man of the people while living a lifestyle that 99% of Americans could never even dream of. That's hypocrisy, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's not just because you're famous and well-liked. Denzel shook his head slowly, deliberately, a gesture that conveyed disappointment more than anger. You know what, Bill? I've been in this industry for over 40 years, 4 decades. I've sat through thousands of interviews, literally thousands. I've dealt with tough questions. I've dealt with controversial topics. I've dealt with interviewers who disagreed with me, who challenged my viewpoints, who pushed me to explain my positions. Difficult conversations, real conversations. But what you're doing right now, this isn't any of those things. This isn't journalism. This isn't even entertainment. It's just mean-spirited. It's cruel for the sake of being cruel. Mean-spirited? Bill's voice dripped with sarcasm, his face contorting into an exaggerated expression of disbelief. I'm being real. I'm being honest. I'm being authentic. Something you celebrities wouldn't know anything about because you live in fantasy land. You're surrounded by yes men and publicists and assistants who tell you how wonderful you are 24/7. Everyone around you agrees with you. Everyone validates you. Everyone protects you from reality. Well, this is the real world, Denzel. And in the real world, people are allowed to disagree with you. They're allowed to challenge you. They're allowed to call you out when you're being hypocritical. Challenge me? Denzel leaned forward now, his voice controlled but forceful. You haven't challenged me. You've insulted me. You've made sweeping generalizations about who I am as a person based on nothing but your own preconceived notions and stereotypes. That's not challenging. That's lazy. That's you substituting assumptions for actual inquiry. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others sat on the edge of their seats. The producers in the control room were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial. But the cameras kept rolling. Bill laughed again, shaking his head. You know what your problem is, Denzel? You can't handle someone treating you like a regular person. You're so used to everyone bowing down to you, so used to the red carpet treatment, that when someone actually pushes back, you fall apart. I'm not falling apart, Denzel said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. I'm recognizing a situation that isn't worth my time. I came here in good faith. I was prepared to have a real conversation about my work, about the themes in the film, about anything substantive. But you're not interested in that. You're interested in scoring cheap points. Cheap points? Bill's face was flushing red now. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about the disconnect between Hollywood elites and everyday Americans. That's not cheap. That's important. But you can't see that because you're too insulated in your bubble. My bubble? Denzel's voice was calm again, but there was something final about his tone. Bill, do you know what I did last week? I spent 3 days visiting veterans at a VA hospital. No cameras, no press, just me, spending time with men and women who served our country. The week before that, I was at a youth center in Harlem, talking to kids about staying in school, about making good choices. I do this kind of work all the time. I just don't broadcast it because I don't do it for attention. I do it because it matters. Bill opened his mouth to respond, but Denzel held up his hand. Let me finish. You sit here in your studio, behind your desk, and you throw stones at people. You make assumptions. You traffic in cynicism, and you call it truth. But what you're really doing is tearing people down to make yourself feel superior. That's not truth. That's ego. The audience was so quiet, you could hear the air, conditioning, humming. Bill's face had gone from red to pale. He stammered slightly. I'm just doing my job. Your job? Denzel stood up slowly, deliberately. He began removing his microphone with careful, measured movements. Your job is to have conversations, to learn things, to enlighten your audience. But instead, you use your platform to belittle people, to make them feel small so you can feel big. Denzel, sit down, Bill said, his bravado cracking. Let's reset. We can start over. Denzel placed his microphone on the chair. He looked at Bill with an expression that was neither angry nor contemptuous. It was something worse. It was disappointment. No, Bill, we can't start over, because this is who you are. This is what you do, and I'm not going to sit here and be part of it. You can't just walk off. Bill protested, his voice rising with a hint of desperation. We're in the middle of a show. Watch me, Denzel said simply. He turned and walked toward the edge of the stage. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, gasp, or remain silent. Bill called after him, trying to regain control. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle real criticism. You're proving my point. Denzel paused at the edge of the stage. He turned back, and for a moment, everyone thought he might return. Instead, he spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the entire studio. Bill, criticism would require you to actually know something about me, to have done research, to have genuine questions. What you did tonight wasn't criticism, it was a performance, and not a very good one. With that, Denzel Washington walked off the set. The cameras followed him until he disappeared behind the curtain. The studio fell into chaos. Audience members started talking all at once. Some people stood up, others pulled out their phones. The producers were shouting into headsets. Bill sat at his desk, visibly shaken. He tried to make a joke, something, about actors being too sensitive, but his voice wavered. The confidence that usually radiated from him had evaporated. He looked small behind his desk, exposed. Well, he said weakly, I guess we need to go to commercial. But before they could cut away, the camera caught something telling. Bill's hand was shaking as he reached for his water glass. His eyes darted nervously toward where Denzel had exited. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely. He wasn't the bold truth-teller. He wasn't the fearless interviewer. He was just a man who had pushed too hard and lost. Backstage, Denzel was already gathering his things. Members of his team surrounded him, asking if he was okay, praising his composure. He simply nodded, his face calm but resolute. One of the show's producers approached, stammering an apology, asking if there was anything they could do to convince him to return. Denzel looked at the producer with that same steady gaze. No, he said quietly, there's nothing you can do. Tell Bill that respect isn't optional. It's not something you withhold until someone earns it. It's something you give because we're all human beings. Maybe he'll understand that someday. The producer nodded, looking embarrassed. Denzel put on his coat, thanked the crew members he passed, and walked out of the building with his head held high. Outside, the cool night air hit his face. He took a deep breath, letting the tension leave his shoulders. His phone was already buzzing. Texts from friends in the industry who had heard what happened, messages of support, offers to speak publicly on his behalf. He ignored them all for the moment. He got into his car and sat quietly for a minute, processing what had just occurred. Back inside the studio, the show tried to continue. Bill brought out his next guest, attempting to act like nothing unusual had happened, but everyone could see he was rattled. His timing was off. His jokes fell flat. The audience, usually so responsive to his energy, seemed distant and cold. During the commercial breaks, Bill paced nervously. He snapped at staff members. He kept asking if anyone had heard from Denzel's people, if there was any chance he would come back. The answer was always the same. No, he wasn't coming back. The rest of the show limped to its conclusion. When Bill gave his final monologue, usually a highlight where he synthesized the evening's discussions into sharp commentary, he seemed unfocused. He tried to frame the incident as Denzel being unable to handle tough questions, but even his most loyal audience members could tell it rang hollow. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out, the conversations were all about one thing: the way Denzel had maintained his dignity. The way he had stood up for himself without losing his temper or stooping to Bill's level. The way he had simply refused to participate in something that diminished him. In green rooms across Hollywood, in production offices and talent agencies, people watched the clips that were already circulating online. They saw a masterclass in grace under pressure. They saw someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Bill Maher sat in his dressing room after the show ended, staring at his reflection. The makeup artist had left. The producers had stopped trying to spin the situation. He was alone with his thoughts and the gnawing realization that he had miscalculated badly. He had built a career on being provocative, on pushing boundaries, on saying what others wouldn't say. But tonight, he had crossed a line, not because he asked hard questions, but because he had failed to listen. He had been so focused on proving his point that he hadn't noticed he was attacking rather than engaging. The worst part was knowing that Denzel was right. He had been performing. He had been playing to his base, trying to create a viral moment, trying to position himself as the fearless truth-teller, taking down a Hollywood elite. But in doing so, he had revealed something about himself that was far less flattering. Outside, in his car, Denzel finally looked at his phone, message after message of support, from fellow actors, from directors, from people he hadn't spoken to in years. They all said variations of the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for showing that you don't have to accept disrespect. Thank you for demonstrating that dignity matters. One message made him pause. It was from a young actor he had mentored years ago. It simply said, "You just taught me the most important lesson of my career. Know your worth. Don't let anyone diminish it, no matter who they are or how big their platform is." Denzel smiled slightly, the first time his expression had softened since leaving the studio. He typed back a simple response: "Respect yourself first. Everything else follows from that." The incident would be analyzed and debated for days to come. Think pieces would be written. Other celebrities would be asked to comment. Some would praise Denzel's stance. A few would criticize him for being too sensitive. But most would recognize what had really happened. A man who had spent his entire career earning respect through his work, through his dedication to his craft, through his dignity and professionalism, had refused to let someone take that away from him. Not for ratings, not for controversy, not for anything. In the studio, the crew finished packing up equipment. They talked quietly among themselves about what they had witnessed. Many of them had worked on the show for years. They had seen countless guests, hundreds of interviews. But this one would stay with them, not because of the drama, not because of the conflict, but because they had seen someone stand up for themselves with such clarity and composure that it reminded everyone watching what real strength looks like. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demean, it simply refuses to accept anything less than respect. Bill eventually left the studio, avoiding the usual post-show mingling. He got into his car and drove through the Los Angeles night, his mind racing. He kept replaying the moment when Denzel stood up, the look in his eyes, that disappointed expression that was somehow worse than anger. He thought about all the times he had prided himself on being tough, on not coddling his guests, on asking the questions others were afraid to ask. But tonight had revealed a blind spot. There's a difference between being tough and being cruel, between challenging someone and attacking them, between seeking truth and performing superiority. The lights of the city blurred past his windows. Somewhere out there, Denzel was probably home by now, putting the whole incident behind him with the same grace he had shown on stage. Moving forward, unbothered, undiminished. And that, perhaps, was the real